A warm welcome to the Game Changer with Joe radio show with host Joanne Williams. Thanks for being here. Please visit us at www.gamechangerwithjoe.com. For additional details, the show is also live streamed using the handle Roch Life on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Periscope. Are you seeking things that set your soul on fire? Is today the day you start your impossible? Remember, you are enough, always. We hope you leave us better than you came.
Welcome to Game Changer with Joe. I am your host, Joanne Williams. It is Thursday, the 12th of July, 2018. I cannot believe I'm saying July already. Where has the year gone? I hope that the goals that you set for yourself this year, that they've been manifested in ways that you never dreamed, and that your wildest dreams, your biggest hopes, and your desires are coming to pass. For the past 2 weeks, I've had my guest, Tonya Bankston. Thank you so much for being here these past couple of weeks to discuss family dynamics. Originally, I had intended to wrap it up last week, but then I thought, what am I missing? And then it dawned on me, you're missing the in-law dynamics. And this is where the discussion ends tonight, your in-laws. Now, let's face it, almost all of us have a very civil relationship with our in-laws. Full disclosure, I was married once, and that in-law relationship disintegrated very, very rapidly for reasons that were beyond my control. At the time, it bothered me, but looking back, probably was the best thing that could have happened to me. Anyway, I want to start with a question. What do I owe my in-laws? What do you owe your in-laws? That's a very interesting and loaded question. Or you might say, as a son or daughter-in-law, what is expected of me? What are my obligations when it comes to relating to my spouse's parents? Put it this way, sometimes it's not a very warm or relaxed relationship. Sometimes it could be a burden in our lives. And sometimes we feel as if we're constantly caught between trying to please them and avoid offending them on one hand. And on the other hand, just wanting to be yourself and be in your own space sometimes. Well, if you're a Christian, you owe your in-laws behaviors that is consistently within your Christian character. As you do anybody else, not just your in-laws, okay? It doesn't mean, however, that you ignore the fact that your in-laws might be difficult people, that they might be controlling, or they might be manipulative, or they might be dysfunctional, or they might not even share your faith, okay? Which could be particularly hard. The problem is just that they're not just about anyone. They are your in-laws. They're connected to your spouse, whether it's through genetics, history, or a whole bunch of different dynamics. If you have a disagreement with your in-laws, your spouse might feel as if they're caught in the middle. Okay? Meanwhile, if you have children, it even complicates it even more. Now, a lot of us feel sometimes that our in-laws are intruding in our married life. There's a saying that goes, good fences make good neighbors. Sometimes it applies. Sometimes we forget, I know I said the word sometimes a lot, I apologize for that, to set reasonable boundaries, okay? We forget that we can firmly and kindly insist that your in-laws respect these limits and these boundaries. It does require sometimes patience, kindness, respect. This also applies to your in-laws as well. Now, let's just be honest, you may not like them, but however, you need to choose to act in a loving manner towards them. For instance, if you choose to adopt one tradition, like, let's say Easter egg hunt, despite the fact that you might not think that your kids, you had already told your kids, oh, the Easter Bunny is not real. If it's a family event, you might need to put, some of your preconceptions aside. When you're married, it's important to understand that you also become a part of another family with its own set of expectations. You need to recognize this. Expectations that sometimes have limits. So what are these limits? Okay. Here are some things that honoring your in-law relationship does not mean, the key word being not, okay? It does not require that you submerge all your feelings, your desires, your preferences, your needs in order to do things their way, even if it's just when they're visiting on the holiday or what have you. It does not mean that. It doesn't mean that you should give them permission to disrespect, control, or manipulate you for their own selfish ends. It doesn't mean that you have to obey all their requests and requirements. Now, in-law conflicts get to be more complicated when it seems as if your spouse is siding with their parents against you. It is normal to feel ganged upon or even outnumbered. Trust me, I've been there. Okay? I want you to think about something. In this particular instance, this isn't so much an in-law problem, it's a marital one. Let me explain. If one spouse remains too dependent on his or her parents, this needs to be addressed right away. Okay? If one spouse is blaming the in-laws for disagreement that a couple is experiencing, it needs to be dealt with. Think about that for a moment. Okay? Sometimes the problem isn't so much an in-law problem, but what's happening in your marriage. Now, some of us are very passive-aggressive. We've chosen to become engaged in a quiet battle with our in-laws, okay? And maybe even so with your partner, okay? With issues that are very tangled, okay? What happens here? It can eventually erode your marriage. Do the healthy thing sometimes. Might need to seek professional help. So, I'm sure you already know this, but how does the relationship with your in-laws affect your marriage? I did some research on this and I found a study particularly interesting. Men who are on good terms with their wives' parents are more likely to enjoy a long-lasting marriage. These same researchers found that a wife's relationship with her husband's parents is a bit more complicated and less indicative of overall marital happiness. Do you understand what I just said? Which brings the question, do you get along with your in-laws? Let me repeat it. The study says men who are on good terms with their wives' parents are more likely to enjoy a long-lasting marriage than those who struggle to get along with their in-laws. The wife, on the other hand, the relationship with her husband's parents are a bit more complicated and less indicative of overall marital happiness. I think that's very funny. A question that a lot of us have struggled with, that I have struggled with. What if the in-laws doesn't accept you? And trust me, we all know when somebody accepts us when we love us. We all know when they're just tolerating us because we're married to their son or their daughter. We know it, we feel it. Okay? Now, it is completely normal to want your in-laws to accept you. Okay? However, that feeling of wanting and needing to be accepted can bring about a whole lot of complications because it can cause you to feel uncomfortable and unnatural around them. Now, you might have hopes that are unrealistic, okay? Many parents are when you're just starting to date somebody, they're very overprotective of their own child, okay? And the majority of parents have such high expectations for the person that their child is going to marry that it can be difficult to meet those in the beginning. Sometimes new husbands and wives assumed that they'll be loved and accepted by the in-laws. Sometimes this is the case, but usually, and you will agree with me, it takes time to establish trust and respect, just as it takes time to build other close relationships, okay? Being accepted into a family home wholeheartedly, warmly, 95% of the time does not happen right away. You have to build up that trust. Just think, after all, you're stepping into a family, okay, with a history of bonds that's been established for generations. I don't want you to feel hard on yourself. I don't want you to expect too much. If your own relationship that you have with your parents is very close, it's very tight, it's very wonderful, okay? Just think, the one that you have with your own mother or father-in-law might not measure up to that one, and it's okay. If your relationship with your parents is not good, on the other hand, you might think that you might come off being too needy or demanding in order to make up for it. I know I'm speaking a lot of psychology here, but please understand that my degree, my first and second degree, is in psychology. You can always go back and re-listen to this broadcast if something slipped your mind. You want to know what the number one factor for resolving problems that we sometimes face when we want to be accepted by our in-laws? Is the support of your husband or wife. As with all close and intimate relationships, if your husband or your wife supports you without jumping into a fight or anything, this can go such a long way in making your inner relationship a much more civil one. Now, when it comes to dealing with in-laws who doesn't accept you, there's some things that you must remember. And if you have a pen, please jot these down. Number one, you have to learn to support your spouse without taking sides. You have to encourage your husband or wife to share their feelings directly with you. You might think, oh, I'm around the in-laws, I'm quiet, or I'm acting different. Your husband or your wife should know something is different. Nobody can read minds. You have to communicate. The third principle is to keep a sense of humor. You have to show that person that your husband or wife is number one in their eyes. That relationship comes first and foremost, especially when it comes to the in-laws. Stop trying to take things so personally. Remember that building a relationship takes time. You have to learn to forgive, to forgive, to forgive, to forgive. By loving your spouse, you're also honoring your spouse's parents. And I hope those principles help you in some way when it comes to your in-laws who doesn't accept you. Now, what if you're in a situation where your in-laws are always trying to run your life? What do you do? If you're like me, I am the kind of person that would take the bull by the horns and have that conversation. That is the Joanne of today. The Joanne of 5 years ago would probably do all the things that research suggests that you don't do. Keep it inside, be passive aggressive, take it out on my husband. But today, that stuff will not slide by me. What do you do if your in-laws are trying to run your life? And I know there's a lot of situations where young husband and wife get married and they have to, rely on the in-laws for help, or in the beginning there are situations where they have to live close by or what have you. In any event, you feel as if they're trying to take over your life. Now, since you and I no longer have a rite of passage, okay, when a young person enters adulthood, marriage often ends up serving that role by default. Sometimes, even though a marriage doesn't trigger an appropriate emotional response or separation from a parent. Now, you got to remember, for 20, 30 years of your spouse's life, their parent has been their probably the closest relationship is who they turn to for emotional support. You guys getting married doesn't mean that that's going to end right away. It's hard to cut the apron strings both ways. Now, on the other hand, if the parent and the adult child relationship is bonded or knitted together in an unhealthy way, okay, this can be problems in the marriage later on. It can gradually, literally kill the marriage. Now, if your if your in-laws are trying to run your life, consider these principles. Honor doesn't mean obey. Remember that honor does not mean obey. Okay? What that simply means is while it may be very difficult for your spouse to speak their wishes to their mom and dad, okay, you have to have that open, honest conversation with them. It's okay for them to continue to honor their parents. That is an admirable quality. Okay? However, there comes a time when you have to stop cleaving onto them and cleave onto your spouse. The same thing is with you. For example, where are you going to live? Now, some parents attempt inappropriate but well-meaning control over where their adult children live. They want to be close to them. They want to be able to watch the grandchildren. There's nothing wrong with that. There are instances where the in-laws even promise them land or the down payment on a house or whatever the situation is. These kinds of things result in strain on family that lasts for generations. These issues must be dealt with quickly and directly, or your marriage is going to suffer. Honor doesn't necessarily mean obey. You have to honor your parents. There's a time when you cleaved onto them, and when you get married, it's time to cleave onto your spouse. Another principle, if your in-laws are trying to run your life, is to maintain respect that works both ways. Okay? If your in-laws were healthy parents, they have many opportunities to do this. I'm talking about decisions surrounding finances, grandchildren, careers, and other important decisions that the adult children must make by themselves. The need for this mutual respect goes both ways, okay? Sons and daughters-in-law attend to their own new responsibilities, and they make sure that major issues like money and childcare are not dumped on the parents' lap or by default. Sometimes you as a spouse need to ask for your parents to respect. And it might be uncomfortable, it might be hard, it might be awkward. You need to ask your parents to respect the relationship. Okay? Now, there are times when the parents might be controlling and they share private information without permission. They might, rage or act inappropriately. It's up to you, if that is your parent, to ask if you're the spouse and this is your parent acting in that manner. It's up to you to discuss safe boundaries. It's going to cause problems in the marriage. Another strategy is to check your assumptions, okay? When you first marry, everybody have all kinds of expectations. People have visions of one big happy family. This can quickly turn into disillusionment, okay? You don't come from the same background, same growing up, situation or household. Each of us generationally operate from our own perspective. When you assume things would happen, it leads to misunderstanding. Parents shouldn't assume that because they've always had or like a particular, let's say, type of car, that their kids are going to want to buy the same. Okay? And just as well, if you're married, don't assume that your parents are going to be doing all the cooking at Thanksgiving. Now, there are times when things break down to the point where in-laws are not talking to one another, or in-laws are not talking to spouses. Imagine the problems there. When things happen like this on either side, it is helpful to bring in a third party. There's no shame in seeking out mediation. There's no shame in seeking out counseling. These are objective people that can look at a situation without the emotion, without the tension, without the history, the background, and the baggage. If you don't want to seek out somebody professionally and you're a Christian, speak to the pastor. I know you might think of it as embarrassing or meddlesome. Hey, it's up to you. I can only encourage you to view this as a chance for the entire family to put their differences aside for the good, for each person to put their differences aside for the good of the entire family. Okay? Always remember that everything has to be dealt with respectfully. Now, another thing that I want to look at is the holidays. The Christmases, the Thanksgiving, the 4th of July, sometimes the Easters, when you must travel, when you must spend time with your in-laws. Now that you're married, the problem is whose mom and dad celebration of the holidays are you going to adopt? If your family is blended, who's going to host these celebrations? Often, newly married families, newly married husband and wife find themselves in a quandary. Where should they go? Okay. Some people I know, to respect both sets of parents, go to the grandparents. Others go from house to house. What's the result of that? They end up not enjoying time together. Now, if the family members live far apart, the question can be answered by where to spend the holidays in terms of finances. How often are you going to go? How expensive it is to get there? Another thing I would recommend that I did not do when I was married is to have premarital counseling, because these are the kinds of issues that will come up in your marriage that is dealt with in premarital counseling, and it gives you strategies on how to approach these problems when they do crop up. Now, in terms of where to spend the holidays, I have some strategies that you can take into consideration. First and foremost, sit down with your spouse and share. Okay? Share how each of you feel about the holidays and how they're spent. Okay? I'm talking about major national holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, any holiday that is special to you. Okay? If it is your family's tradition to drive, for instance, to Thanksgiving, don't hesitate to mention it. Okay? Super Bowl, last day of school, don't assume that your spouse is going to always want to go to your side of the family. You have to talk, you have to sit down and share openly and honestly. Another thing you can do while you're having this sit-down conversation is talk about how you spent holidays as a child. What did you enjoy? What would you have liked to change? Now, a lot of us sometimes marry people from different countries or cultures. Let's say you marry somebody from England who doesn't separate Thanksgiving or Independence Day, and you're from the United States. How is that going to be handled? Is it just going to be washed over? Consider also, when you're sitting down, how your parents and other relatives might want you to be involved. Maybe they want you to spend Christmas Eve service together because that's important to your wife's parents. Maybe Christmas dinner can be spent at your husband's. You have to be open to you have to be open to the desires of family members. You cannot allow yourself to be controlled by them. Another thing you can do is to agree as a couple, independent of your in-laws, how you would like to spend your own holiday traditions, how you would like to establish them. You have to work with balance and fairness, okay? You might decide to spend Christmas morning with your parents and Christmas evening, if they live close enough, with your husband or wife's parents. The following year, you might decide you're going to be home. Or if you have children, spending time with your children. Another strategy is to be open to change and your plan is needed. Don't be so fixated on what's written down and what you discuss that you remain inflexible. You have to be flexible. You have to find variation to avoid hard and hurt feelings, because the in-laws are going to have expectations as well. What is going to happen when you like, okay, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and your in-laws are not happy and they're expecting something different from you? We have to break the cycle of expectations. Everybody has expectations. You do, your husband's family, and your family. Besides all the steps that I outlined, now the holidays and observing them can be an emotional minefield for couples and in-laws. There's some things that you have to keep in mind, okay? It might be a lot easier for you and your spouse to change what you want for the holidays than for your parents to adjust what's important to them for so many years. Remember, for 50 years, your parents or your spouse's parents have been celebrating things a certain way. You just got married, you just got into the mix, things have to change. You have to also, once you've shared with your spouse what your expectations are and your plans, you have to share these with your in-laws as well. Let them know, first of all, that you value time with them. As your family grows, there's going to be competition for who sees who. The expectations that you develop have to be realistic, okay? If you have wishful thinking, it's time to get rid of them. I'm sorry, because it will only lead to hurt feelings and disappointments. Remember, when you bring extended families together, there's personality differences, there's physical limitations, there's disagreements that don't just appear because of a particular date on the calendar. It goes way beyond meeting on a certain day. Another thing to remember is when it's time to give gifts, that can be very conflicting. Sometimes it can be very hurtful. Okay? Remember, if you give somebody a gift, you might have spent a lot more money on it than you felt they spent. Please keep it together. Don't wait until you get home to talk about it with your spouse and all that stuff. Are you giving a gift because you want to receive, or are you giving because you simply want to make someone's Christmas or holidays a little bit brighter? It can really get out of hand. People can really start to become very competitive, creating hardship for themselves and their families. Okay? Maybe there are families that do secret Santas. That's something to consider. Here are some strategies to think about when spending the holidays together. Aim to make them enjoyable and memorable. Okay? You have to find a way to balance your own traditions with those of the homes that you and your spouse come from. Another strategy is to keep the focus on time spent together rather than the amount of the money spent. Okay? And if you're a Christian, invite Christ to be the honored guest in all your plans and your celebration. Put him first. I hope these strategies have been helpful to you. I hope that something has stuck out to you in the way that you have been dealing with your in-laws, or vice versa, how they've been dealing with you. Remember, sometimes the problem is not only your in-law. You could be the problem. I want to conclude this discussion by focusing a little bit on whether or not you are the in-law. So if you're listening to the discussion tonight and you happen to be the in-law, this advice is for you. This advice is meant to be helpful in avoiding conflicts and keeping your in-law relationship with your son or daughter's spouse healthy and contributing to their marriage success. You might think, oh, if a marriage breaks down, it's because they didn't work on it, or it's their fault. Step back, get it together. The in-laws have so much to do with it. So much you don't even begin to know. If you are the in-law, the first thing I want you to consider is not to give advice unless your adult son or daughter specifically ask for it. Even if they ask for advice, please be very mindful of how you give the advice. Try not to lecture or preach. Simply offer suggestions or solutions. Give the people asking the advice freedom to accept or reject them. If they reject them, it's not about you, okay? If you're dealing with a young couple, do not offer financial assistance unless the couple specifically asks for it. Okay? It is very important for a couple to establish their own independence, both emotionally and financially, of their parents. It might be very, very difficult to watch your child and their spouse struggle to make financial decisions. Realize that they're doing this because they're trying to build their life together. And these trials are valuable to their marriage. If you are the in-law, keep your personal questions to a minimum. Okay? Your married son or daughter allegiance is to their spouse, not to you, not to either set of parents. This new couple, especially if they just got married, they need privacy. They need to develop a meaningful relationship. If a couple confides in you, please respect their confidence. Don't repeat what they have told you to friends or relatives. You can lose their trust. Trust is something that takes seconds to break and so long to build. If your son or daughter just got married, don't expect them to live according to your standards and your values and the things that you hold dear. Remember, they are starting off on their own. They need to develop their own traditions, independent of what their own parents raised them on. If you're the in-law, let go of your children. Give them room to live their own lives. Rather than living through your children's lives, find your own activities. Don't expect them to spend a lot of time with you. You need to let go and let them build their own healthy relationships. If you're the in-law, treat the couple with respect and don't belittle them or their decisions. They have a lot to learn. You had a lot to learn when you just got married. They need to learn those lessons on their own. Allow them. You see them making a mistake? Well, if it's not something that's going to hurt them physically, let them make those mistakes. And if they do make mistakes, please don't say, I told you so. All it's doing is being very self-serving. Another pet peeve that somebody expressed to me: don't expect your in-law, son or daughter, to call you mom or dad. Okay? They might feel comfortable calling you by your first names. If such is the case, accept this decision. Don't make an issue out of it. Move on. Life is way too short. Okay? If you're the in-law, take a genuine interest in your new son or daughter-in-law. Try to find out what their likes or dislikes are. Okay? Attempt to have a meaningful conversation with them on their own terms. They just got married into a brand new family. They might be feeling overwhelmed. They might be feeling pressured. They might be feeling, oh my God, what have I done? Meet them where they are. If you're the in-law, do not treat your in-laws as a rival that, who has stolen your child. Welcome them into your family. Instead of dividing the love, you will be multiplying it. Friends and listeners, I've spent the past half an hour trying to address some of the things that we typically see in in-law relationships. I started by discussing if you owe your in-laws anything. Okay? I laid out some strategies on how you should set limits and what these limits does not include. I asked the question, how does the in-law relationship affect your marriage? Yes, it does. What if your in-laws doesn't accept you? I offer suggestions such as learning to support your spouse without taking sides, keeping a sense of humor, encouraging your spouse to share your feelings. I ask the question of what if they're trying to run your life? Remember, you can honor but not necessarily obey. You can maintain mutual respect. You can check your assumptions at the door. And if all else fails, be open to mediation. Now, I also discussed the holidays and in-laws and how sometimes everybody has expectations. Where am I going to spend Christmas, anniversary, children's birthdays, national holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving? So much to think about when you're bringing families together. I ask you to check your assumptions at the door, to not hold any expectations, because you are going to set yourself up for failure. You're going to set yourself up for hurt and disappointment. Finally, I address the matter. If you are the in-law, some advice for you. Not giving advice unless they ask for it. Not offering financial aid unless they ask for it. Keep your personal questions to a minimum. If they confide in you, please respect that confidence. Don't expect them to live according to your standards and your values. Treat them with respect. Okay? Take a genuine interest in this new son or daughter-in-law who has entered into your life. If you're married, there's a chance, unless your spouse, parents have passed away, that you were an in-law once and you remember that time. Now, a small majority of the people listening to this discussion tonight might have had a very loving and warm, caring relationship with their in-laws, and they transition seamlessly into that in-law dynamic. That's totally fine. Share this discussion tonight with somebody who needs it. I appreciate you listening to me. I appreciate you tuning in every Thursday night to this program. I appreciate the fact that you could be anywhere else on a Thursday night, but you choose to be here. I know sometimes it is not very easy, but you can and you will overcome. If you need to reach me once again, please go on to my website at GameChangerWithJoe.com. You can also email me. All my contact information is there. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to have you. If you have suggestions, you'd like to follow us on social media, it's the Game Changer with Joe radio show. Thank you for being here, for sharing, for liking, for tuning in, for being who you are. Once again, I look forward to being in your homes and in your hearts every Thursday night, Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to take a quick break, and when I do return, I'll be playing you a YouTube clip, 7 Keys to Getting Along with Your In-Laws. It's just adding on to what I've spoken to tonight, but this time by somebody who is a professional in dealing with these relationships. I thank you very much for listening. Until next week, take care of yourself and each other. Remember, I'll take a break. You'll hear some music, and then there will be a YouTube clip offering keys to get along with your in-laws. Until next week, have a good night.
Hello, welcome to Real Life with Lisa. I'm Lisa Jacobson of Club31Women.com. I am the wife of Matthew L. Jacobson and the mother of 8 lovely children. So today what we're going to be talking about is I got a question from a reader that I thought maybe some other people might also have a similar question. And it has basically to do with how to get along better with your in-laws. And I'll just read what she wrote, and you can see if there's anything here that you can relate to. All right, so she starts off. Okay, this is a tough one. I believe, if I remember correctly, that Mr. Jacobson's parents have lived with y'all for many years. Which is true. They've lived with us for 18 years now. If it's not too personal to ask, please tell us about how this came about. Okay, so I'll tell you about that a little bit later. And my tough question is, how do you ever gently set proper boundaries with, let's just call it, overzealous or overbearing in-laws? Okay, so that's the basic question. And then she continues, I know this is a loaded question, and I realize that it looks differently for every family. The reason I ask is this. This has been a big opportunity for growth in our marriage. We are blessed that we grew up in the same small town, and both of our parents live literally less than a mile from each other, and both sets of parents live less than 5 minutes from our home. This is a huge blessing when it comes to convenience, and especially nice for holidays and family gatherings because we are so close. But with all due respect to his parents, in our 13 years of marriage, we have had to set some pretty firm boundaries with them. So, with all that, what advice do you have? And she adds, please hear my heart. I love my in-laws, but it's been a rocky road for sure. Okay, so let's talk about in-laws. Now, I have to just tell you right off the bat that both my parents and my husband's parents watch these videos. So everything I'm going to say is going to be truthful and hopefully gracious. And they are actually very big supporters of what we do here. And so I think they would be fair to say that they would be behind talking about this sometimes delicate topic. And as for how my husband's parents came to live with us, it was about 18 years ago, and my father-in-law has a very serious heart condition, and we didn't think we would get to have him for very long, although he's defied all the odds and he's still with us. Hey, Dad. And so we thought we would be taking care of Matt's mom for when he died. As it turned out, Matt's mom developed Alzheimer's, and many of you have followed our story there, and she recently went to be in heaven to her real home just a few months ago. So for the last 18 years, they have either lived with us in this very same home or on the same property, just like a little home right next to our home. And we have had lots of opportunities to learn to love each other, to learn to grow and work together. And, I tell people that no, it's not easy to have your in-laws live with you. I think it's easier in some cases than it is in others. I'm blessed to have in-laws who are very respectful of us and support our values and really do all that they can to be a positive influence in our home. So I just have to say that much. It's not just that we're saints. They're really good people to have around. But that's not to say we haven't had our challenges. So I also don't want to paint too rosy of a picture, because in the beginning, especially with my mother-in-law, we really clashed, and it was one of the hardest relationships I've ever had to work through. One of these days, I'll sit down and I'll tell you the whole story, but we won't do that for here. We'll just stick to the question, which is basically getting along with your in-laws. How do you establish healthy boundaries, maybe with in-laws that are a little bit overzealous in their desire to be a part of your family? Okay, so here are what I consider 7 key elements. The first one is to remain one with your husband. So the husband and wife need to remember that they are on the same team, and that everything else that happens outside of that is secondary to your relationship. And I know that there have been different situations with not just maybe our father-in-law, mother-in-law, but even with sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws, where we have had to remind each other before we went to Thanksgiving or Christmas or dinner with some of the either side of the in-laws and say, hey, let's remember that we're together in this. And it's a good reminder to each other. Then the second thing is and this is closely related to the first, is my husband always reminds me that they are on the outside looking in. which is to say, when it comes down to it, our circle is complete. Husband, wife, and children. We are our own identity. And everybody else can be a part of it, and we welcome them, we love them, but they are on the outside looking in. So that's another policy that we established early on that really helped clarify things for all of us, I would say. All right, third thing is let the little things go. And what I mean by that, and this is honestly from years of experience, I used to get so ticked at these small things that I took offense at. Sometimes it was things like my mother-in-law just walking in the house. She would kind of knock, but just walk in at the same time. That's just what they do. And to be honest, it took me a long time to get used to that, just having somebody walk into my home, and they live right next door. So there was lots of coming and going. But now looking back, I realize she didn't mean to invade my space or to, that's just kind of the way they grew up. That's what they did. They just would walk in. And I think, if that was something that was really important to me, then I could have addressed it instead of just getting ticked and assuming she was doing it just to bug me. And you know what I'm talking about. So there's lots of those kinds of things. Another thing that comes to mind is sometimes with grandparents and your own children, that respect of each other's values and rules. So I'm going to talk about what's important and but for right now, this is more the things that aren't important. Okay, so for instance, things like, say I have a no sugar policy for our kids, which I did for many years. I've kind of dropped the ball on that one, but my in-laws used to give our children soda and canned soda. And of course, this was definitely breaking the rules from my convictions that the kids not have sugary drinks. And you might be sitting there listening to this and either thinking, well, that's kind of silly. Or you might be one of those people that goes, no way, they were giving them sugar. I know. But when, again, after years of experience, I would say that's a little thing. And you know what? Now the kids go over there and most every afternoon they'll watch Western shows with Grandpa, and he will give them a piece of licorice or 2 or 3 or more. I'm not sure how many they're up to now, but you know what? My kids' teeth are rotting, but they're also having wonderful memories of these afternoons with their grandpa. Am I really going to have a tug of war on something so small in the long run, when knowing that as our kids get older, they'll look back so fondly on those memories? So those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. So let those little things go. All right, next one is don't budge on the big things. So pick your things that are truly important to you, that you are just not going to bend on. For our family, some of those things might be what shows our children are allowed to watch, movies or television. We feel very strongly about what goes into their eye gate. And so if you don't abide by our policy on that, then a couple things that happen is, you might not be able to show movies to our kids, or you might not even be able to have our kids over to your house, because that's a deal breaker. That is a really big deal. So pick those things that are really important to you, and then just don't move on them. And if it upsets your in-laws, if it ruffles their feathers, you know what? I'm sorry, and I feel badly about that. I always try to, we want to communicate love. We want to communicate we care. But you also need to understand that you need to respect our rules, our values too. I just want to make sure that there's not a list of, here's our 100 rules, and you have to follow that if you want to have a relationship with our kids. Well, I don't want to do that. But there are some that are just non-negotiables. Okay, next one. This is another one of those big ones that we sometimes miss is don't assume your in-laws understand your convictions or understand what you're trying to do or understand what they're doing that's offensive. I think this is a big mistake I made. I did assume my in-laws understood us. They just were being ornery about it. And now I can see that there are a lot of things that they came from a different generation, so it was different for them, or they just don't think the way we think. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration. And not assume that they are just doing it to defy you, And also try to take the time, if at all possible, to explain where you're coming from and explain why you maybe have these policies, or why this thing truly offends you or is not okay. And don't just go in assuming that they understand. They're just refusing to abide by it. Okay, next one is give your in-laws a chance to grow too. I think we can forget that they're people, and we have growing to do, and you know what? They have growing to do. I was just recently talking to my father-in-law, who's in his 80s now, and he's actually on hospice, and he was just saying how some areas that he was growing in, and I told him, I said, Dad, that's so discouraging to hear. You're in your 80s and you're still growing. In the sense of, I was kind of hoping I'd be all done by the time I was 80, and he just laughed. He said, nope, still learning, still growing as a person. And I think that's a good thing for us to keep in mind, that they're people too, and they've got growing to do, and to give them a little bit of grace that you might give other people, and we forget to give grace to our own in-laws. All right, last one, number 7, love on them. And, it's just that old law, Scripture talks so much about loving each other. And I think we apply that to our neighbor. We apply that to the cashier, maybe, and we forget to apply that to our in-laws. And I'd have to say that when I think of my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, that was something that was a good challenge for me to have, to remember, to give them a little touch, that little hug, a little word of encouragement, a word of affirmation. Just love on them, no matter where we were at in our relationship or what had been done that it really annoyed me, and vice versa. I know that I've annoyed them as well. So love covers a multitude of sins, and that is true with your in-laws just as it's true with anyone else. So, Allison, I hope that encourages you, and I hope that gives you some things to think about. And anybody else that maybe has a challenge with wanting a good relationship with your in-laws, but finding it difficult. All right. I welcome you to comment, ask more questions. If you have other encouragements that you would include to some of the things I've mentioned here, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you, and God bless, and I'll see you next Wednesday.